Hi, I'm Martin Kelly with Friends Journal, and we do author chats. And I'm very happy today to be joined by Ron Marullo. Welcome, Ron.
Welcome to you.
Great to have you here. Ron is the author of I Ain't Marching Anymore, a Vietnam War Resister's Journey of Conscience in the September Friends Journal. And I'll just introduce you here, Ron, with their bio from the article. Ron Marullo is a writer of fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. He writes about topics that usually point out the ridiculousness of mistakes we as humans continually make. Yes, I know this. He has a 33-year teaching career, has worked construction, and has been organizing and submitting his writings since the pandemic. So tell us why you wanted to write about your experiences with conscientious objection.
Well, I was thinking about the 60s, and I was thinking about our present state of affairs, and I saw parallels. And for me, the draft notice was the end of the 60s, and it was kind of a final point on what happened during the 60s and the frustration level. I was a sophomore in high school I was in American history class, as a matter of fact, when the PA system came on and said that President Kennedy had been shot. About 20 minutes later, the PA system came on again and told us that he was dead. And we ran out into the halls. We were totally confused, totally overwhelmed, hysterical about what had happened. And then Martin Luther King, the civil rights movement, peace, love, change, came to another demise, and then a few months later, Robert Kennedy. And at the same time, civil rights demonstrations were going on, peaceful. And then Vietnam comes along and demonstrations continue against the war. And the total upheaval, even the Chicago Democratic Convention, I mean, all these things shaped my life and pushed me towards making decisions about the type of person I wanted to be and what was right and what was wrong. And that motivated me to become a draft resistor and then to write this piece later on in my life.
Right. And it'd be good to sort of give a little background, what the draft was, what it meant to be resistor, and what it meant to be a conscientious objector. As we were reading this article, actually, one of the champions, I'll give you behind the scenes for the editorial process, one of the champions was one of the younger members of the committee who didn't really know much of this history and was just sort of fascinated by the process that you laid out, that you had to go through for this status. So tell us a little, how did your notice come? How did you apply for this?
Well, I had the 2S deferment. And then when I married and I had 2 young children, I was given a 3A deferment. And I thought that I was safe from military service. I mean, the draft was big. And we even had a lottery system later on. And my lottery number was like number 12, which
And is that good or bad? Let's give the context here. That's very bad, I think.
That's bad luck.
Yeah.
That's the month of my birthday, December 12th. But so all of a sudden, I mean, I'm thrown into this process that I had very little knowledge about. I mean, when I received the notice that I was reclassified from 3A to 1A, I was in a panic. I mean, I didn't understand what was going on in terms of the process. And that's when I found a flyer for the Quaker interest in helping people who are going to be drafted or thought they're going to be drafted or could be drafted, help them with the process. And so that's when I made an appointment with a young Quaker. And all of a sudden, he laid out the whole process and what we could possibly do to at least stretch out the draft notice so that I wouldn't be drafted immediately.
And so this is a service that these Quakers were performing. I know there were various Quaker organizations or heavily Quaker organizations, the Central Committee for Conscientious Objection and the National Interreligious Service Board for Conscientious Objection.
Right.
I've been involved with some of these groups, so I kind of remember the names. So this is a service Quakers were doing to provide information. I'm happy that you got in touch with this person who could give you that whole knowledge.
Well, it was a miracle because I had talked to one draft counselor prior to this. And when I told him I had a 3A deferment, he laughed. He said, unless there's an invasion of the country, you're fine. You have no worry.
Okay.
So I took that to heart. And then when I received the 1A notice, I was like, wait a minute, something's wrong. And, my whole life, I've had instances of crises. And I know that I was being directed by something other than myself, something very spiritual that was pushing me into different directions. I mean, why would all of a sudden I seek more draft counseling when the first one failed? And all of a sudden, here's a notice by the Quakers, free draft counseling. And I just, for some reason, was motivated to try again to see what the status was and the process was and so on. And I just became more and more frustrated with the system, the fact that they just thought you can go off to war, don't worry about anything, just go out there. And then when my best friend brother was killed in Vietnam, that pretty much pushed me in a different direction. And
Sure, that would be rough. Yeah.
yeah, that was terrible. I mean, and I became angry about
Hmm.
the political system that was involved with sending young people over to Vietnam, and the death rate was incredible. If you watch the Netflix special on Vietnam, I mean, I can't even watch, I have to watch it in short bursts because it just lays out the ridiculousness of that war and the fact that over 50,000 of our brothers and sisters were killed in it. So all that motivated me to put together. And I was only 20 years old at the time, you
Wow.
know.
Yeah. Big decisions to be
that
making.
was that was part of the shock.
Well, it sounds like some of your frustration tied up the bureaucracy a little bit. I love the story of the questionnaire. Do you want to share that again?
That was another intervention of the Holy Spirit because the whole draft physical was just humiliating. And then we were herded into this room and we had a box on each desk. And inside the box was a bologna sandwich, one Hostess cupcake, and an apple or something. I don't know. And I just looked at it and I said, there's no way I'm going to eat this. The army is giving me this. Forget it. And they started passing out this paper. And the sergeant at the desk said, it's entirely voluntary. And we just want to, if you are inducted or when you're inducted, you have to go through a security clearance. And this is part of the process. It speeds it up.
Hmm.
So I looked at it and it said, have you ever been a member or are currently a member of any of the following organizations? Well, the Communist Party makes sense. The neo-Nazi Party makes sense. But then the Daughters of Garibaldi, and I looked at that and I said, who are the Daughters
Who
of
are
Garibaldi?
they?
And I just said, that's it. Read a couple more and there was probably 20. I just said, I can't do this. I will not do this. And then when I was leaving, I gave it to the sergeant and he stopped me and said, you didn't fill this out. And I said, no, it's voluntary. He said, well, it is voluntary, but now you may be a member of one of these organizations and you don't want to tell us. I looked at him like, get me out of here. And then they escorted me to another room and a captain came in and he said, I'm going to ask you some questions. My secretary will type your answers. Now I'm really frustrated. And I said, is it voluntary? And he said, yes, it's voluntary. I said, well, then no, I don't want
And
to.
no, right.
Right. And then the
But that
sergeant,
frustration was put to use there. Your
yes.
frustration really came through.
And then the sergeant said, we're going to keep him overnight. Now I'm in a panic about being held
Sure.
overnight in the Army in Buffalo, New York. And he said, no, let him go. Well, when I went back to the Quaker counselor, he kind of laughed and said, you know what you did? And I said, no, not really. He said, you delayed your induction for approximately 6 months because we have to investigate.
Right.
You have to investigate to make sure I'm not a daughter of Garibaldi. I mean, this is just so it just increased my willingness to find a different path. And the path from I went to Canada. Um, I hung out with some draft resistors from the United States, and it was very frustrating and depressing, the life that they were
Hmm.
living, lives they were living in Canada. I mean, no jobs, no money. Um, it was very frustrating. I decided that was not an option. And that's when I decided to apply for conscientious objector status. And that was even, I mean, that was even, I never realized how much was involved with taking that step. The questions, I mean, I had to soul search everything, go back and forth and back and forth. I mean, because I was in fights, I've hit people, and I mean, it was deep, very comprehensive to apply for that. For me,
Yeah,
anyway.
sure, no, it's hard for everyone. I'm sort of a younger generation here, but I had a similar experience a little bit in that my father really wanted me to go to the Naval Academy. And for a while I thought, well, I get to dress nicely, I get discipline, sure. And over time I was like, well, but they also, are intimidating people. It's, all about creating a killing machine. And for me, I realized I couldn't do that. And it set in motion a whole line of questions like, what do I believe in? And if I don't believe in this, what else I don't believe in? And, that's kind of why I'm at Friends Journal now, probably. It's, you can see a whole line. So tell me how it was for you. What were some of the thoughts that were going through your mind as you actually decided to take this step towards conscientious objection?
Well, one of the major problems in the beginning was the fact that I wanted to be a teacher and involved in the educational system in some capacity. And a convicted felon, that's out.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that was the beginning of trying to decide what I was going to do, and going to jail for 2 years, leaving my family, my children, all that frustration led me to the fact that I had to take a stand. I wasn't going to run away to Canada. I was going to stay in the United States, and I was going to apply for conscientious objector status. I had to go through my conscience and figure out exactly where I stood in terms of violence, in terms of pacifism. And, it was quite the ordeal. And
Mhm.
I was baptized a Catholic. I used to love the Mass. I used to love the whole concept of Christianity, being in a church on a Sunday in a Mass.
Mhm.
So I had that background to deal with: Jesus Christ, Holy Spirit, God, all of that. But to actually put it down on paper and
Mhm.
to try to somehow answer these questions with that kind of a background, I mean, it was very exhausting. It was exhausting. But I have the copy that I actually put in for conscience
Oh,
of
wow.
judge, and I go back and I read it, and I still pretty much do believe in all that, obviously.
That'd be great just to have a statement of, what you believed at that age. So you were 20 still at that
Yeah.
point?
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. And as I recall, for formal conscientious objection status, it's not just that you are opposed to the Vietnam War, you have to oppose all war. I guess it's loosened a little bit, but you had to have a religious basis for a while
Yes.
so you could have that. And any other restrictions that you remember that you had to, hoops that you had to go through to prove that you
No,
were
I don't
sincere?
remember others. The big thing was whether or not you wanted to serve in the military as a non-combative, which would have, eliminated the prison time and the felony conviction. And I had to struggle with that. I mean, I would be maybe a medic, and I would be helping soldiers who were wounded and needed medical treatment. So I thought about that for a long time too, but then I thought the final determination was I would be supporting a military system. I would be supporting, violence. And so I decided, and that took a while because I could have avoided a lot of stuff, but I decided no, I didn't want to serve in any capacity. That was part of the process.
Yeah. So what was the result there? Did you go to jail? What was the
No,
process? What were the repercussions?
what was interesting was up front, the counselor, Quaker counselor, told me that it would go to the state level, and the state would not overturn a local draft board's decision normally under normal circumstances. There were 5 members on the state board. So my conscientious objector status went to the state board, and instead of giving me conscientious objective status, they gave me back my day deferment. And that was pretty weird because that wasn't supposed to happen. I mean, I had gotten the 2S and I had signed a waiver and I wasn't supposed to get any other deferment, blah, blah, blah. And yet the state 5-0 gave me back my 3A deferment.
I guess then they, if they're keeping records of how many people are conscientious objectors, you wouldn't show up in that because they did the deferment. So maybe they had their own reasons for wanting to
They didn't
do
want
that
another CO
on
roving
the
the
record books. Yeah.
planet.
So how do you feel? Did this process change your life or influence you since? Do you feel sometimes still drawn to that as you've gone about and had a career and family and everything?
Absolutely. I mean, that was a turning point in my life. I mean, I made decisions from filling out those forms and answering those questions, actually made concrete what I had inside me, ideally. I mean, you think about this and think about that and whether or not you hold it true. But when you have to put it all on paper and you have to submit it to the world, it changes you. And I've lived by that philosophy since that age. I mean, I've done it in my educational experience with children. I've done it in my private life with friends, caregiving others. My wife and I have been doing that, for decades.
Well, that's great. So in some ways, there was a silver lining to having to go through all this.
The connection with the Holy Spirit. I mean, I really believe that it really started with that process that I went through, the draft process. Because I mean, there's so many different points in my life where I know that it's a spiritual thing, a spiritual solution, and I've been fortunate enough to know that.
Wow, that's very beautiful. Well, thank you, Ron, for coming on with us again, everyone. Ronald Marullo, author of "I Ain't Marching Anymore: A Vietnam War Resister's Journey of Conscience." It's online at FrenchJournal.org, and that and many other writings are there, and you can leave comments, and maybe Ron will see them and be able to answer them. So, thank you, Ron, for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Martin. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.